When major emergencies happen, they take to the sky. We count on them to take those in critical condition to the nearest haven and be our eyes in the sky during major disasters. They are the men and women of the aviation emergency services. Life in the EMS SAR community can be very demanding, but one thing's for sure, when in distress, call EMS. All right, fellas, today we have a very special guest. He is our first Patreon to ever be on the show. He was a former Black Hawk crew chief, and he is now working with the emergency medical services. He's been doing that since 2013. Please welcome Frush.
Hey. Welcome, Frush.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for being here.
Glad we could have you on. Sorry about the little bit of confusion beforehand.
Hey, it's what it is.
And that's how confusion is, like that's the spice of life. Without some confusion.
That's kind of how most of our careers have gone to this point. You just kind of show up and you go, where do I go? And somebody points you in a direction and you're like, okay. And you walk over there until somebody else points you to go back to where you came from.
Right.
I've always felt like I just look at it and go, okay.
there it is. Contrary to that, when you see like a giant line, you're like, and you just walk over there, hey, what's this line for? Like, I don't know. I'm just standing in line. Nobody even knows what it's for. Oh man.
So what got you started? I'm gonna start off. What got you started in aviation? Was it when you joined the military, or was it even before that?
Growing up, my father worked on Cobras and Hueys, so I grew up sitting in the back of Hueys as a kiddo, and it was just something I'd always wanted to do.
Hey, those are my babies right there. You're talking my language now.
Yeah, my dad was a National Guard member, so it was the old single engine Cobras and Hueys.
That's still good. We got some of those at the old schoolhouse that used to be where I learned how to do stuff. They did have single engine stuff, but they were so torn to pieces because they want to use them for museums and whatnot. So it wasn't like it had the husk of an engine, but it didn't actually do stuff.
Oh yeah, that's it's sad. Those are such iconic birds. Like right now, where I'm out here in the area of California I'm in, they have this guy across the runway here has a graveyard of Hueys and J models and F model Cobras.
Oh man,
there, it's just so cool.
Totally, I'm gonna go over there and just bask in the history.
Oh, totally.
So are you living out here again, or are you back in Colorado?
So I actually live Colorado, and the company pays for me to commute out here and work.
Oh, so you just come out for like a week or so at a time?
Yeah, my current schedule is I come out for 2 weeks and I go home for a week. So
I worked that before. It's not too bad at all. It's a little taxing on the family at times, but we all have been there.
But if you do it right, you can make it almost like a vacation. So before my wife had a career, we would hop in the car and road trip it out here since my schedule was kind of like preset. It's similar to AOG maintenance kind of world, but things are a little more planned majority of the time. So we would come out here, the company would pay me mileage, pay for the hotels, and the family and I would go sit on the beach depending on where we're at.
Oh, that's cool. It's a good way to do it. So I have no experience in the EMS realm, and I know Six does not either, although he has helo experience, to which I don't have any. So can you explain to us a little bit about the EMS side of things? So
with the EMS world, especially as a mechanic, you're kind of a jack of all trades. You, as a base mechanic, you're assigned to that one base, and usually base mechanics kind of live in the local area. And it can be a really cool gig, but it can also be a gig where complacency can fall in because you are the only mechanic there. Yes, you have a manager, but half the time you only talk to him on the phone. You barely ever see him, maybe once every 3-4 months when he comes by and does a base inspection. But it is your job as the mechanic to maintain your tool certs, expiration dates, to schedule and plan your maintenance, to try and reduce out of service time. So you sit there and oftentimes try and use like, hey, we got a thunderstorm coming in and we're not going to be able to operate for between these 3 hours while this thunderstorm's here. Well, cool. If I have a hangar, I'll push in the hangar and I can complete the maintenance then. You also have to do, there's a little bit of politics depending on what base you go to, because, I mean, let's be honest, you have a bunch of A-type personalities between a pilot, a nurse, a paramedic. So sometimes there can be some drama, and my biggest thing on that is just stay away from the drama. But most of the time, once you get those things down and figured out, you come in, you do your daily pre-flight, you do all your paperwork, and then you punch out for the day and go on call.
Okay. Nice. So are you pretty much on call then? You have your normal set work hours, right? Let's say 9 to 5, and then after 5, you're on call from 5 p.m. till 9 a.m. the next morning, or is that?
So the way it works for me is I'm on call 24/7. So I don't necessarily have like actual set work hours. So like I go in at 8 and I usually leave around noon. I go grab lunch and then I'm done for the day. If there's maintenance to be done, sometimes that can go up to, they won't let us work past 14 hours, but it still requires a bunch of manager approval to get, 10 hours, we have to call our manager, 12 hours, we have to do this. And then at 14 hours, we're done for the day with a mandatory 10-hour reset period of no disruption. That's not all companies necessarily operate that way, but yeah, man, it's a pretty easy gig. Like I said, I'm on call 24/7 during my 2 weeks on. Then I go on my 1 week off, and it's no one disturbs me.
That sounds like AOG maintenance, what I used to do before you and I had worked together in our past life.
Well, you're not wrong, especially in the position that I'm in. I travel as a float, so I go cover guys on their days off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I am attached to my phone and pretty much travel to wherever they need me. So there's been times where it's like, hey, we have an engine change. The helicopter's stuck in the middle of this cornfield. Can you fly out there and help the mechanic knock out that engine change and get the aircraft back in service? So I've had that side, but then there's also the other side where it's, hey, so-and-so's taking vacation. We just need you to fill there for 7 days and then go to this other base for 7 days, cover so-and-so for his days off.
Oh, okay. Right on. So I heard you say you had to track your own calibration, your own tools, do you have like your own van, your own shop van, truck, whatever, once you show up to, or you have to travel with everything?
No, actually. So most of the bases that we have kind of generally have tools set up. So at the base mechanic level, you're kind of, say you're assigned to just that one base, right? So you go to the same place for 2 weeks and that's all you do. I mean, you usually live there, right? So it'd be like, say I live in San Francisco. My base is in San Francisco, so I go into my base in the morning, do what I gotta do, and then I go back home. But I am responsible for maintaining everything at my base, and my base can be anything from a nice hangar with an office to I've worked out of a 10 by 12 tough shed in the middle of North Dakota, where without insulation. So you got to kind of choose where you go, and you set up your base life and kind of set it up to the way where it works, and you meet those, checking your calibrations, making sure you're sending tools out for calibration, making sure that, like I said, your stuff's not expired, and maintaining your inventory and all that.
Jeez.
Okay.
Can you imagine that dice roll of getting that non-insulated shed in the winter?
I can tell you what, I had to call my manager once where I was like, hey, everything in my flam locker is frozen. Is this still usable, or do I need to toss it and order new stuff?
Oh, Jeebus.
Oh, my God. That sounds miserable.
So as far as working in the EMS field, do you guys have to have like any certain qualifications besides being A&P certified? Like, do you guys have, like, is there a time when you guys have to be flying along with the medics and the pilots when they go for a call?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. Do you have to have like a basic, what's the stuff we all went through in like SEER school?
Oh, survival training?
Like survival or field medic stuff, the basic,
Not really. So
CPR?
so it's kind of funny because all I ever do is I just turn wrenches on it. I'll fly on it when we do like a track and balance, or if there's a maintenance flight that needs to be done. But there's really no specific qualification except for an A&P license. And most companies, I think, like you to have at least 3 years prior helicopter experience.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some companies out there that will take you straight out of A&P school. I will tell you that is a whole different beast in itself, especially coming from the military, is learning to mesh with your medical crews and learning to do all the civilian maintenance stuff too. Because we fly under a Part 135 operation, so
Mm-hmm.
a little more regulated by the FAA than Part 91, and it's not necessarily like a Part 145 where, like I said, you have everyone kind of doing their everyone kind of has their assigned tasks, and that's all they really worry about.
Okay.
So almost every aircraft for EMS is all helicopter related. Like, is there any like where it's like a propellered plane or anything like that?
There are companies that use like King Air, fixed wing King Airs, and Pilatus PC-12s, and in fact, there's
I have seen the Pilatuses before, but those are mostly, that was out of Santa Barbara, and those are mostly organ. They're hauling organs from one site to another for transplant patients and things.
I know. Oh, 1 second. The helicopters are hovering outside my window here. So, like with us, with my specific company, we do have a fixed wing where they'll actually fly out to, middle of nowhere, Oregon, or it might just be a dirt strip and pick up a patient because we don't have a helicopter nearby, or if it's a direct kind of deal of, they're really messed up and we need them at an Air's hospital, but we need to get them there fast, so we can send a King Air, pick them up and then load them up and fly them out. Whereas the helicopter can do all the same stuff, but the helicopter doesn't necessarily have the same,
Didn't have the
area.
duration time.
Yeah, the same distance.
So,
Okay.
Given all that, right, and you kind of touched it a little bit. What's the the demand? Like, how I would say your up rate, like how many aircraft you need to keep up in any given time?
So with most bases, we only have one aircraft. Current base I'm at now, we actually have two aircraft, but one's set up for search and rescue and the other is set up for just straight EMS. We are usually up, I would say probably most of the time. They don't really, the industry's really gotten away from telling the mechanics of how many missed calls and how our downtime has affected missed calls, because they're really trying to get away from putting stress on the mechanics while they're doing maintenance.
Right.
So there used to be a point in time where I would take an aircraft out for, 2-3 hours, and then it would be like, hey, we had this many missed calls during that time. And it was one of those things where you get mechanics in the mindset, especially guys who came straight out of the military, where that's that mission first mentality.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, it's not completely fixed, but it's good enough. You guys can go back in service. We can get you out there. That's things that they're trying to get away from. Nowadays, it's all about safety.
And you use those 10% overflies for everything.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they've gotten away from that quite a bit. There's some companies that I've been to, some smaller companies that are kind of more mom and pop that still kind of operate that way because they're trying to break that line of profit versus loss,
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the larger companies, they've gotten away from trying to put stress on the mechanics. A lot of the stress that I see in the EMS industry is actually self-induced.
Okay.
Okay. Guys putting pressures on themselves. So,
Yeah.
So would you say then the biggest problem then at this point is the clashing of personalities between air crew maintenance and then the medic team?
So it's that's kind of a case by case ordeal. So like there's been some helicopter bases I've gone to where it's been a totally toxic culture of everyone trying to get ahead of everyone else and everyone getting in everyone else's business. And then there's other bases where you have this dream crew of everyone trusts one another, and you show up in the morning, they're cooking bacon and eggs, and before you know it, you're sitting down at breakfast with the crew, and everyone's just having a good family breakfast around the table.
Oh, that's cool.
So, it is one of those things that I've always been very, for the most part, open and honest with my med crew. But there are some med crew that I've come across, or individuals who, if you sit there and be like, hey, this is broke on the helicopter, it's not going to affect you. Some people get fixated on that one broke thing, and then they start badgering you about it, and they start stressing out because they don't necessarily have the same knowledge as the mechanics do on how the aircraft operates. So the big thing with that is just kind of educating your crew on, hey, this is how this works, and this is how this part plays into the system, and why it's broke, but we put it on a deferral, and we're going to get it fixed, but it's not going to affect the airframe structurally in any way, shape, or form, or the way it flies. So it's just getting that education piece in there is what I find helps a lot with some of that issue.
So now you guys get the call. We need you guys to get out here to this spot to do XYZ. What's the usual action from there, from the moment you guys get the call?
So usually, when the crew gets the call, they rush out. They do a quick walk around of the aircraft. They make sure everything's unplugged, because we have shore power and some other STCs installed that will allow you to that charges the medical equipment while it's plugged in on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So they go through, they make sure that everything's removed, all the removed before flight stuff, do a quick walk around, make sure everything's safe, all the cowlings are closed. And then, your crew does kind of, they'll post fire guard, stand outside and make sure everything's secure while the aircraft runs up, climb in, and then they take off.
Is there like an average response time that you guys have to be within so far of an emergency in order for you guys to take the call?
I don't really know on that aspect. I know most places that I've worked at, the response time's always kind of been around trying to get about 8 minutes between the call and taking off. But usually, like I said, when they get the call, you get the pilot who sits there and he'll start looking at weather and planning real quick. And then, your paramedics and your nurses will sit there and they'll go through and they'll maybe get kind of an idea of what their situation they're getting ready to walk into, and if they need any special equipment and whatnot.
Do you have to be certified to fix any of the medical equipment on board the helo, like medical specific stuff? Maybe, I don't know. Do you have to have some sort of AED training, or I don't know? Can you explain some of the systems maybe that are on board a helo for a lot of us that don't know, like myself?
So a lot of the time, the equipment that we carry is we have a monitor that can monitor your heart palpitations and all that, like an EKG monitor, basically. We have some infusion pumps and a ventilator. So our med crews are trained to be able to intubate someone, which means if you are having trouble breathing, they can put a tube down your throat and put you on a ventilator so that will help you breathe. The paramedic, they're allowed to push drugs. So if they need to sedate you, he can drugs into your system and get you stabilized, and then the nurse kind of works underneath the direction of a doctor. Now, for equipment wise, most of the stuff that they carry is just like IV infusion pumps and like I said, ventilators and EKG monitors to be able to monitor all that stuff. And we have some built-in medical oxygen systems that we can tap into.
So let's say those systems are either one depleted, broke, or outdated, and you're replacing it with a newer unit. Are you then the one who has to replace those, or do you have to do that in tandem with one of the medical staff? And then because you're the A&P, since it's being installed on the airframe, you have to be there to witness it, to sign it off, or what kind of ops checks are involved in that,
So a lot of the way that a lot of the stuff is set up is it's modular. So the only thing that we as the aircraft mechanics really have to worry about is the mounting systems that require the 337 since it's a modification of the airframe. So like our monitors, they pull out and they come in, there's a quick disconnect that they can hook in. And so that way we don't really mess with the monitors. That all goes to a separate biomed company who can manage and maintain that equipment. We just get we just deal with the actual mounting equipment that holds that equipment to the airframe.
So just the trays and the racks and the hardware and such.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, are you as the lead or the head of maintenance or whatever for that base? Are you in charge of scheduling those systems to be clean, controlled, tested, the medic systems, or is that the medical staff who has to schedule that time and then work with you to set up a time to have those systems look? You know how like in a hospital they have the different technicians come in to inspect the CAT scans or whatever machines, MRI stuff.
So usually there's someone separately who manages that the medical equipment. So usually what happens is we have a spare that we can put in and they'll pull that unit out and send it in for maintenance, or we had a third party company that came through, a biomed company that's come through and they stopped by the pad and just inspected the equipment, pulled it off, inspected it as long as someone was there to meet up with them and get them into the airframe and whatnot.
Okay.
Now I can imagine when these equipment go in or pre and post flight, who sterilizes all the equipment? Is it the nurses and the paramedic, or are you allowed to help them sterilize all the equipment?
So usually that is the nurses and the paramedics' responsibility to sterilize things. That's kind of been a big thing recently with all the current events going on. We actually have a whole checklist now that the med crew has to go through and sign off saying, hey, we sterilized all this and this and this.
Oh, like a daily thing. Do you have to do that similar for like the cockpit for the flight crew? Because I know in Six and I's past lives, there was checklists where wherever the air crew were at, that was a daily cleaning. Or if multiple crews were going to be in the same area in the same time, it was it had to be cleaned in between each crew coming in. Checklist. Is it the same thing then for you guys?
So we have a daily checklist that is signed by both the mechanic and the pilot that says we went through and we inspected all these different things within the airframe. But when it comes to sanitation, that's all on the med side where it's like, hey, because usually there's a curtain between the pilot up front and the patient area or the crew area.
Okay.
Depending on airframe, I mean, if you're flying in a Bell 407, there's not much of a curtain. The patient's feet are literally sitting next to the pilot the entire flight. But we just have a checklist that they fill out saying that they basically sanitize the airframe before we even start doing maintenance. So it's not a daily thing. It's just usually after they either transfer a known patient that has an issue or before we do maintenance, they're supposed to go through and do all that.
Is that all recorded? Like you sign off a piece of paper or a document saying we sanitize this and it gets filed somewhere?
Yes. A lot of the mechanics, we actually have a file in our filing cabinet where we can save that. But
so there's not like an actual write-up that will go in the logbook or anything stating that you complied with this step or whatever. Yeah, I have a feeling that's coming though, right?
Maybe someday. Hopefully not. I mean,
I hope not either.
It's with the FAA, everything. It's one of those things where it feels like the paperwork every year. The paperwork seems to get longer and longer and more because of someone screwed up, and they just want to be able to make sure they can cover for more.
Right. Which is why I asked, especially nowadays with the virus thing, then, they can turn around and say like, oh, you guys are the ones who gave me COVID because reason X. It wasn't the fact that you were at a EDC concert or something like that,
I think that the burden of proof on that would be on the actual individual making the claim, if that makes sense. Because I mean, that would be
right. But you know how people are.
Oh, I know. But I mean, that would be a really hard thing to sit there and be like, oh, yeah, I got it here because this. It would be hard to really substantiate that, I would suspect, because
Yeah, but they'll try.
oh yeah.
They'll try. So how many different models of helos do you yourself have to work on in the on the EMS side of things?
So my company has 4 different models right now.
Okay.
They used to have Bell 407.
Mm-hmm.
Good airframe, but recently they've kind of gone more towards the Eurocopter side, or Airbus, I should say, not Eurocopters. Airbus acquired Eurocopter, so it's all Airbus now. So we have 4 different models of Airbus helicopters that we operate. We have an EC-145, an EC-135, the AS-350, and the EC-130.
Okay. Now, out of those 4, which ones would you say are probably the least? What's the most maintenance? Needs the most maintenance, and what needs the least maintenance, and what's the easiest to work on and such.
And that is I would say the EC-145, depending on whether it's a newer model or an older model, it probably needs the most maintenance because it has an old system called VARTOMs that they use to slave the engines, I guess. It's predates FADEC.
Okay. So it's an old system then.
Yeah, it's like a governing system between the cable-driven system.
Yep.
And then the newer 145s come with a FADEC, so that whole headache goes out. And the 145 also has like an oil-filled main rotor head and these vibration dampers, balls that spin around on the rotor head.
So how often do you find those dampeners to be leaking?
Me personally, not very often.
Okay.
We stay pretty well on top of that. For those of you who don't necessarily know what an EC-145 is, it is basically what the Army's Lakota is.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The other easiest one I'd have to say, or the easiest one, some might say it's the A-Star, because it's a fairly easy platform to work on. It just has some inspections that are a little more, has some shorter inspection periods. And then my favorite's the EC-135. That can be, the EC-135 has so many integrated avionics in it that it can be kind of intimidating if you aren't super savvy with your avionics.
So with that said, did you have to go to each school for each airframe and get type rated on the model, and then same thing for the engines installed? Did you have to be type rated on those?
So for some of the accreditation out there, they require the mechanic to be factory school trained on both the airframe and the engine. So I've been to the Pratt & Whitney school for the engines on the 135, and I've been to the factory schools for the EC-135 and the Bell 407. And then I've also been to the engine schools for the A-Stars and whatnot. I haven't gotten all the factory schools. They kind of break them up. You kind of get maybe 1 or 2 schools a year, kind of keep you enticed and staying.
That's nice that they actually put you through that, because I know a lot of, for like corporate jets and stuff, man, to get on to one of those factory schools is because they're expensive. So most places don't want to pay for you to do that. So if your outfit's putting you through those schools, that's pretty nice.
Yeah, and like I said, that all has to do, depending on, a lot of it's driven by the accreditation process. So, we have CAMS, or CAMS is the name of the accreditation. It's, let me think of the name of it here again. It's the Commission on Accreditation of Medical Transport Systems. So they try and set kind of a national standard across EMS industries.
I see. I had no idea that something like that even existed. So I'm learning stuff all over the place here.
Same here, So for those listeners, you guys want to do something in the EMS field, that might be something for y'all to look into on top of getting your A&P license.
Now, are the schools, where did you have to go? Where are those schools located? They kind of all over? Did you have to go to Europe for some of them? Did you have to go to Canada for like Pratt & Whitney?
So most of the schools are kind of done out of Dallas Fort Worth area.
Yep.
Up in Grand Prairie. When I did my Pratt and Whitney school, it was Flight Safety is the one who Pratt and Whitney does all their factory
stuff through. Yeah, I went there as well.
So Airbus is out of Grand Prairie, and then Bell is out of what used to be out of Alliance.
Oh, interesting. So is there any ratings you have to stay on top of, like that are annual, that you have to, they're recurrent every year? You got to retest on it to maintain that accreditation to it?
No, not really. I mean, the only thing that might even touch that would be an IA certification if you have that, but
sure.
I don't really. I mean, I'm eligible for my IA, but I have yet to go for it because I just don't really utilize it.
So okay, so then how many times have you been spot checked? Are you guys spot checked by the FAA, or do they come in and do inspections? Is there maybe the local FSDO will come out, but because it's medical transport, is there only certain individuals from the FSDO that are certified to come out and do those?
So we are a Part 135 operation, and through 3 different EMS companies I've worked for, we operated with FSDO out of Dallas, Oakland, and San Antonio. And usually you have one guy that's kind of assigned to your company that oversees it, and he's the one that your company kind of interacts with on a regular basis. But we always try and keep the aircraft in a position where the FAA, the local FSDO, can walk up at any point and be like, "Hey, let me see your airworthiness certificate or your registration." And playing with the FAA is always a whole different game within itself, especially with the way our helicopters are set up. The FAA is really big with the NVG systems on helicopters. So we have NVG systems, and as one of the things that if an FAA inspector shows up and sees it, usually that's one of the very first things that they kind of look for. Any of the delaminated filters that might be on top and stuff like that.
Now,
can you explain what an NVG system is for maybe some of our listeners who don't know?
So the NVG system would be a night vision goggle system. So basically it's a bunch of filters that take away the white light and turn everything to a blue or a green light, because our night vision goggles have actual blue light filters in them. So it doesn't disturb the goggles and cause a bright light for the disrupting the mechanic's vision. I mean, the pilot's view.
Now, does the FAA, do they inspect the medical equipment too, or is there like a different organization or institution that does those?
I mean, they'll come in, they'll look at it, and usually the big thing that the FAA worries about is, hey, can you show me the inspection or continued airworthiness inspection? I'm screwing that one up. I'm trying to think of the name.
No problem, man. No problem.
Acronym soup,
I know, right? I used to calling everything by acronyms, and I can't think of.
Well, the issue is when somebody calls you and it says, "Hey, what's that stand for?" and you go, because you've been calling it that acronym for so many years, and then when somebody finds says, well, "What is that?" and you're like, "Well, hold on a second, you asked me too
exactly
fast."
Right. It's like its own language, you just start wrapping it off. Like, I have no idea what that means. Like, you need your own little decoder ring to figure it out.
It's freaking Latin, man. It's Latin.
It is. It is.
Man, I can't even think of the instructions for continued airworthiness. So ICAs kind of govern things that are not necessarily covered by the actual aircraft manufacturer. It might be like an add-on, that brand new bumper you buy for your Jeep. There's a separate manual that tells you how to fix things on that bumper for your off-wheel Jeep.
Gotcha.
We have that on the
so
helicopter.
It's like a book for like a component.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like a back shop would use or something like that.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. I mean, it's kind of like a third-party component that's been put on the airframe. So, like,
sure, yeah, it was a mod that you did, and you installed this component, and you say, well, how do I actually fix the component itself? And it's got its own law, it's got its own manual. I get you.
Yeah, I think in the military we called them AMAMs.
Yes.
Oh yeah, AMAMs. There you go.
Yeah, let me cross the realm here.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. So Fresh. Say we have a person who's fresh out of school, whether high school or A&P school. What would you recommend if he says to you, "Hey, I want to be a part of EMS"?
I would sit there and tell them to look it up online. There's plenty of companies that are hiring, and make sure if you get yourself into, you can at least get that helicopter experience, because you got to get the fundamentals down first, man.
Yeah, get into a rotorcraft class.
I mean, you get into a point where just being exposed to the 135 operation would help a lot too. Just because, I mean, when you come out of A&P school, I mean, I don't think they necessarily showed you how to track all your calibration and kind of getting all the operations down of how to manage all that stuff.
No, definitely not. At least the school I went to.
Yeah, I mean, would you guys sit there and take someone straight out of A&P school and put them in maintenance control?
No. I
I
mean, I've seen people do it just to get them out of the shop. Like, you're worthless to us, go to control. I'm like, well,
yeah, you do less damage over here, but
and then control turns around, like, here's your broom, here's your dustpan. It does what it's told.
yeah, you sit over here and you input this data every day.
I mean, that's like my company even has a maintenance control operation now.
Oh wow.
So like we send them all the documentation and a picture of the logbook entry, and they kind of review everything and make sure that it meets 43.9 or 43.11, depending on whether it's an inspection or just a common sign off. It's having all those items that are required for your logbook entry. That is another thing I would recommend for A&P mechanics, is just kind of be knowledgeable of the FARs, man. I mean, I've worked with guys in the past that have gone to 145 operations, and in a 145 operation, you don't necessarily always sign off the work. You may sign off a task card. But out here,
everything's covered under that 145. Yep.
Absolutely. So like out here, you're actually practicing with your A&P license. So you need to make sure that you put that aircraft date, time, and your signature and a brief description of what you did.
Oh man, you mean proper documentation?
Oh yeah.
we had a whole episode about that. You probably listened to, but yeah, it's one of those. I always tell guys, I said, you can never have too much information. I said, if you can write it to the point where an FAA inspector can read it and have no questions to ask, you did a good job.
And that's kind of a funny thing there, because there's two views on that. There's a view of, hey, I'm going to be as general as possible because it gives me an area to kind of like, hey, I said I use this maintenance manual, but I didn't necessarily say which revision, so I can, go to this revision. And then there's some people that'll sit there and be like, oh, you need to have the torque wrench serial number, part serial number, the revision number, and all this other stuff all the way down to the chapter. And there's two thoughts on that, because if you keep it very general, if you find yourself sitting in front of a lawyer because something, God forbid, something happened,
yeah,
they're going to take a look at your logbook entry and be like, so you said you did this inspection with this chapter, with this revision. Well, did you know there was a new revision that came out 2 days prior to that, but might not necessarily have gotten pushed out to you right away? So you could sit there and say, hey, you did this maintenance with an old revision.
Got you. I mean,
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess I can see where it's a double-edged sword there, but fortunate for me, I haven't been smashed yet. So by putting revision down, but also you're hoping that your system, your company system, the QA there is on top of that stuff and saying, hey, there's a new revision out, even if it's not pushed to you yet, but there's a whole new revision out, and you can just get that stuff done. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Like QA will cover you on that instead of QA trying to smash you. They got your back in that instance. Hopefully,
and good companies do that. But I mean, also as a mechanic, like even if you decide to practice your license out in general aviation outside of a 135 Part 91 or whatever, you need to make sure that you are at least checking those revisions.
Right, most definitely. And then you also don't want to just be so vague, like, removed part, like, okay, what did you remove and why and where? What's it doing? Just like, I did it. Like, I don't. Why?
Remove fuel control. Why did you remove the fuel control?
Oh, that's the other thing. I mean, there's so many. You've got all your dirty dozens, so you have the norm. So, like, I've had maintenance control guys sit there and yell at me for not putting a logbook reference in. I'm like, well, technically, if you look at the FARs, all it says is I have to have a description so that someone who does not have the knowledge of the system can understand what I did.
Right. Yeah. At least that. Don't just be like, I took this off. Like, why though? All right, Frush, any closing thoughts for us and for the listeners?
Hey man, I think what you guys are doing is a great thing. I think it's important to expose the aviation world, especially the maintenance side, because I feel like as maintainers, we often get overlooked. We're the silent professionals, I guess you could say, where Congress and everything will pass things about regulating pilots and crew time, but when it comes to mechanics, man, those guys, they can work all night long and nothing bad's ever going to happen. So I think what you guys are doing is shedding some light on a group of individuals who are often overlooked.
That's the goal of it. Yep. Give credit where credit's due.
And if you ever decide to get into EMS, just realize that whenever you go back to a regular 145 or an operation that requires you to be there 8 to 10 hours a day, it's going to drive you bonkers because you get so much freedom with your schedule right now.
Hard to have that ball and chain tied on you.
Oh, man.
I feel you. I understand.
going from adulting to having to have someone watch every step of every moment of your life. Closing thoughts, MVP.
Frush, it was great to have you on. Good talking with you again. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk with us a little bit, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Hey, anytime.
All right. We like to thank Frush, especially being our first patron being on the show. We also like to thank our other patrons like Erica Lamont, Stephanie Boatman, Mike Diltz, Jenny Dignan, Laura Mans, and Thomas Connolly. You guys have been such tremendous support to us and helping us be able to make shows like these, bring in patrons like Frush here and helping Shoreline Love His Life to help us out with doing all the stuff for the show. Please like, subscribe, leave us a review, follow us on our social media at Cancel for Maintenance or Kanks for Maintenance podcast on Instagram. Check out our merch at cancelformaintenance.com. We have some giveaways that are going to be coming soon in light of the holidays. More to follow on that. Some of them are from aviation tool companies and whatnot. And if you have some ideas for the show or you'd like to come on the show, visit us at cancelformaintenance.com. Send us a line and do everything we can to get you and your ideas on the show.